Masculinity standards, they are everywhere, interwoven throughout American pop culture. But rarely do we stop and think about how much we internalize these messages and really contemplate how they affect our society as a whole. Manspreading, mansplaining, and manfixing are all results of the way our culture dictates that a man should prove his gender. Now, I'm not saying that men aren't to blame for these or any other behaviors I'll be discussing. What I'm saying is that American culture enforces that men must prove their masculinity in a way that yields overall negative effects for everyone. In response, we must look to ourselves and how we act in order to change our culture's masculinity standards. This cultural mindset begins very early on. 1 in 4 boys are bullied at school, but only 30% notify an adult about their abuse. One of these silent boys at 11 years old couldn't take it anymore. So one day at recess, he snapped. Throwing his tormentor on the ground, he began to punch. But he was so emotionally drained that his arms felt weak. He could feel in his hands that the blows he was dealing would not hurt like he wanted them to. He had come this far and yet couldn't make this kid feel how he had felt. And when he came to school the next day, he was subject to this bully telling everyone that his punches didn't even hurt. This, out of everything, devastated him. But why? Why is this kind of physical shaming so effective towards boys and men in our culture? Well, according to Joe Ehrmann, it's because the 3 main ways our culture lets men prove their masculinity is through economic success, sexual conquest, and physical ability. Now in this instance, we're talking about an 11-year-old boy, so a socioeconomic class system is not super prevalent yet, and he's probably not quite at the age where sexual conquest is part of his realistic agenda. So what he has left is his physical ability, which was just publicly stripped from him. Which according to our culture means he is lesser, maybe not to everyone, but to himself. Now, along with all other humans, you have feelings. And most of you watching can agree that talking about your emotions is a critical part of processing those feelings. But not everyone has been given the tools to do that. 80% of men suffer from alexithymia. This is defined as a personality construct characterized by the subclinical inability to identify and describe emotions in the self. The core characteristics of alexithymia are marked as dysfunction in emotional awareness, social attachment, and interpersonal relating. Around the age of 15 is when emotional language tends to leave the narrative of boys. This is the exact same age at which boys' suicide rates become 5 times more than that of girls. This abandonment that boys have over the emotional sides of themselves may be a result of transitioning into manhood. For their whole lives, they've been taught to associate being a man with bravery, emotionlessness, and strength. So it would make sense that they would adopt these behaviors in the process of coming of age. And this is only reinforced by society. For instance, have you seen more than one of these films? Chances are you answered no. But if I ask the same thing about these, you'll probably give a different answer. And I'm sure you can guess which ones made more money. This tells us that by a large margin, people are less likely to see a film about men overcoming emotional conflict through love and finding themselves, and much more likely to see films in which a man suffers emotional loss, as a result fills himself with hate, and then turns that hate into violent actions, which then solve his problems. But this kind of behavior isn't limited to the silver screen. On July 30th, 2016, soon after a breakup with his girlfriend, 20-year-old Alan Ivanhoff acquired a gun. After contemplating suicide for a long while, he drove to a house party in Mukilteo that his ex-girlfriend was attending, and opened fire. He killed 3 people that night, his ex being one of them. He later stated that he wishes he could have never acquired a gun in such a state of rage. So he had the emotional loss of being broken up with, but because all his life he's been taught that boys aren't supposed to get sad, he turned these feelings into hatred, which presumably is first aimed at himself as he is considering suicide. But that isn't productive, because you're a man and men fix their problems. And as we've been taught, the best way to fix your problems is through violence towards others. And now 3 people are dead. Now imagine a kid who's having a hard time in school. He's a social outcast and having emotional distress. So he turns those emotions into anger towards those who have been neglecting and emotionally abusing him. And then we end up with a school shooting. As stated before, every individual needs to be held accountable for their actions. But it must be acknowledged that there is something fundamentally wrong with the messages we are sending to boys in our society. However, this is not to say that all aspects of masculinity are bad. To paraphrase psychologist Ryan Mckelley, there are many situations where bravery and emotional disconnect can be beneficial. It is when we make that our default that it starts becoming an issue. So how do we combat this? Well, our good friend Joe Ehrmann says that we need to change the definition of what it means to be a man altogether. Instead of having these 3 criteria, we should be instilling in the minds of boys and men the importance of these 2 things: relationships and cause. By relationships, he's referring to participating in genuine human connection and loving unconditionally. And cause refers to finding purpose in life and feeling like you have made the world a better place. And this outlook can be applied to much smaller situations as well. Take, for example, one of the most masculine things in America: sports. For that, you need a team and a goal. But how might we achieve this mindset throughout American culture? Well, I'm glad you asked, and so is Ryan Mckelley, who says social changes don't require this mass organized movement. All it requires is for each one of us to make one small change in our lives to get people to respond differently and put down this mask of masculinity. He elaborates by saying we need to eliminate phrases like "boys will be boys" and stop acting like a girl. We also need to promote making our social environments a safe place for men to be able to share their feelings. And if anyone's looking down, rather than turning a blind eye, we should show them comfort and compassion. This is especially important to do for young children who are just learning how to behave socially. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to boycott movies like these, but we need to set more examples than just this for how problems can get solved. One way to do that is to go out and support movies like these. I'll leave you all with one more quote from our dear friend Ryan. "It doesn't take courage to hide behind a mask. What requires courage is to be open and vulnerable no matter what."